Hello and welcome to my easy to understand guide to Vogue magazine and the magazine industry. Vogue is an optional set text at A-level on the EDUCAS Media Studies specification. Not all schools doing EDUCAS study Vogue as their historical magazine option, but if you do, this video is going to tell you all about that and the industry that it is part of. I also have videos on my channel for other magazines within this option as well, like Woman's Realm, Huck, and The Big Issue, so please check out my channel for other videos that might be relevant. So Vogue magazine is created and published by Condé Nast, which is one of the biggest magazine publishers in the UK. They're a very large magazine publishing house making a huge range of titles that you will often see on the shelves in the UK, as well as titles around the world as well. Vogue magazine itself started all the way back in 1892 and the American version was bought by Condé Nast in 1909, potentially because they felt that it was a successful magazine. They could see that there was a future for it and they wanted to bring that magazine into the Condé Nast brand. They started the UK version of the magazine in 1916. So the UK version of Vogue is a kind of spin-off, if you like, an international version of the original American version. And in the first part of the 20th century, Vogue did really, really well. You know, in those kind of wartime periods, you would think that perhaps people would not be buying a lot of magazines, and particularly fashion magazines would have seemed insane when lots of people were off at war. But actually Vogue magazine did quite well during those wartime eras. And it's, you know, partly to do with its kind of more affluent target audience, but also partly to do with the fact that it creates this very aspirational, dream-like brand. And certainly in the post-war period, kind of 1940s, 50s and 60s, it did really well. There was a big economic boom. Lots of people were consuming and buying a lot of things with their newly found disposable income. And fashion magazines for women in particular were very, very popular. And that popularity has continued really since then in a world where magazines have in general been declining in terms of popularity, certainly print magazines. Vogue, as a very high-end fashion magazine, has actually still been able to retain quite a lot of its readership and circulation figures. And its success has carried on throughout the decades. So throughout the 60s and 70s, for example, they launched Italian Vogue and Brazilian Vogue, Germany Vogue, Spanish Vogue. They launched other issues in Japan, China, Russia, India, Mexico, and the rest of Eastern Europe as well. So there are a huge number of international versions of Vogue, just showing how popular that format is across the world. And very reflective of Hesmond Halg's ideas about taking a very successful format and copying it, repeating it in order to make more and more profit. Condé Nast do take risks. Sometimes, you know, there are certain theorists like Hesmond Halg who will kind of say that it's all about minimising risk and maximising profit. And a lot of companies do that. They won't take a lot of risks, or they will try and minimise risk where possible. But Condé Nast have actually taken quite a few risks throughout the years that have meant that their magazines are often seen as very unique and unusual. So for example, they were one of the first magazine publishing companies to start using colour photography in their magazines back in the 1930s, and this was seen as very unusual. It made them stand out from the crowd. It was more expensive to produce, but their target audience could afford it, so that was okay. In the 1960s, Condé Nast was purchased by Advanced Publications, which is part of the kind of Samuel L. Newhouse group. They again kind of started adding more and more risk taking to their business plans. So they started to change the face of fashion using the very first black African American model on the front cover. You know, in the 1970s was quite a risky thing to do for a fashion magazine, but it changed the world and it paved the way for more and more models and celebrities of colour to appear in mainstream magazines. And the audience does like that riskiness. The audience like the idea of Vogue magazine being in particular at the forefront, the cutting edge of fashion and magazine making. And so they like the idea that their magazine is going to be pushing the boundaries. And so that kind of brand identity of being very modern and risk taking really works for the brand Vogue. There are ways that they try to minimise risk and to maximise their audiences. So they do a lot of collaborations with kind of celebrities, whether that is people appearing on their front covers or whether it's people actually guest editing the magazine. So for example, over the years, they've had very famous artists like Salvador Dali and Andy Warhol create their own guest edited versions of the magazines using their artwork in collaboration with the fashion photography as well. And so kind of really quite famous and legendary artists appearing in this magazine give the magazine a kind of air of quality and exclusivity. In fact, Vogue has been quite famous for featuring, a lot of people even before they became famous. So very famous photographers like Cecil Beaton, for example, featured in Vogue perhaps before they became more globally recognised. They've had a lot of writers feature in their magazine as well that have gone on to become kind of legendary within their time. So people like J.D. Salinger, Virginia Woolf, Zadie Smith, that has added again this air of quality, modernity. It makes the magazine feel exciting and exclusive, but it also, because we now know with hindsight that those people have gone on to huge things and have gone down in history as being kind of one of the best of their kind, if you like, it means that Vogue now has this reputation for finding talent before anyone else has seen it, and that reputation has carried on into a kind of modern world as well. Even people like Nelson Mandela has guest edited a copy of the Paris Vogue. So, getting really incredibly famous people to collaborate with the magazine, take part in it, is a great way of drawing in audiences. Princess Diana legendarily appeared on the front cover of Vogue, so getting a member of the royal family to pose. These are ways of drawing in audiences, making the magazine feel very collectible and exciting, and would in particular draw in global audiences for that magazine who are often really excited by the idea of finding out more about the British royal family. So Condé Nast hasn't always just stayed in the magazine industry. They have, of course, diversified, because every company now tends to diversify in order to make more money. So Condé Nast actually has its own fashion and design college now, where budding fashion designers can go and learn their craft under the guise of learning from the best, learning from people who were involved with Vogue. And so that's another way that they've been able to make money. They also have the Condé Nast Luxury Conference, where people can go and, go to workshops, hear people speak who are, some of the most high-end luxury designers and brands that exist. And that has been another great way of making money from that kind of high-end brand market. They also have a restaurants and bars division as well, where they launch kind of branded restaurants relating to some of their magazine titles. There is actually a kind of Vogue bar cafe. It's ways of trying to take that brand image of an exclusive high-end fashion forwardness and turn it into another area of the media in which they can make money from. There have been some very famous editors of Vogue over the years, strong women in particular, who have been at the forefront of fashion and who have become iconic in their own right. People, whether they are the editor-in-chief of the magazine or whether they are the fashion editor of the magazine, they have often gone down in history as being some of the most powerful and important women in fashion. And so people like Anna Wintour have become legendary and iconic in their own rights, made huge changes to the magazine over the years. So, Anna Wintour, for example, when she was editor-in-chief of Vogue magazine, having her at your fashion show was, a very big kind of badge of quality for a lot of designers. And in Vogue in particular, she changed the style of what Vogue was doing. She changed the kind of models they were using a lot more Hollywood models on front covers rather than just fashion models. And that changed the face of magazine industry in general, whereas lots of other women's magazines followed suit and started to use celebrities as well. Anna Wintour started Teen Vogue back in 2003, and then in 2005 Men's Vogue. A lot of new outlets, potential revenue streams that have been started by people at Condé Nast with a view of making more money from that Vogue brand. As well as the College for Fashion and Design, there is also a Vogue Fashion Fund, which is, it was started in the mid-2000s, and it was all about helping new fashion designers fund, whether it's, clothes shows, promotional materials. So it's a way of finding new talent and promoting it in the market, which, you know, again, sounds very selfless, you know, helping new designers come forward and find their feet financially. But ultimately, again, it's still increasing and adding to that reputation of Vogue being at the forefront of fashion, finding new talent and nurturing them. So all the kind of extra revenue streams that they've started, or the extra projects that they've diversified into, are all about adding to that brand of Vogue being the most iconic and the most powerful one in terms of fashion. They even had their own exhibition in the National Portrait Gallery to celebrate 100 years of Vogue and fashion photography. So it just goes to show how big and important and powerful a brand they are. Advertising is hugely important in magazines, particularly as sales of many magazines are declining. Vogue magazine is, if you count the number of pages that are adverts, it's a huge number. In fact, there's more adverts in Vogue than there have ever been. And the reason for that is because it makes them a massive amount of money. Vogue and Condé Nast charge £36,000 for one full page advert for a brand. So if you count up the number of adverts in one copy, you are looking at that being a massive amount of profit that they can earn from advertising. And, you know, the audiences love it. A lot of magazines, a lot of audiences now are kind of going off advertising and finding that it puts them off of a magazine. Whereas actually in Vogue, audiences seem to be embracing it because they actually, you know, audiences come from that more affluent background and they want to be sold products because they are these aspirers who want to learn how to look better, to be better. They like and embrace that culture of, you know, Vogue telling them this is what you should buy. So advertising is a massive part of Vogue and Condé Nast. Vogue have now obviously moved into a lot of digital media as well, so there is a digital version of Vogue available, and you know, you can take that direct onto your tablets and phones, for example, and that's a great way of targeting more modern audiences. They have quite a strong social media presence as well, and they do that in a lot of their countries, so it's not just Facebook and Twitter, for example. They also use like WeChat for China. And so they are trying to go where their audiences are, and they do recognise that a lot more people are online now. In fact, you know, the people at Condé Nast have said that, you know, the future of magazines, it might not just be print. Perhaps there'll be more involvement of things like augmented reality and artificial intelligence, perhaps, you know, on computers to try and tell them a bit more about their audiences, or on their website for them to be able to, for audiences to be able to use augmented reality, for example, in the future, to be able to access their content or to enjoy some of their fashion spreads. So they are aware of technology and they are using it to a greater extent now. So that was my easy to understand guide to Vogue and the magazine industry. Please check out my channel and subscribe for lots of other videos that are relevant to you, including The Big Issue. If you are studying Vogue, The Big Issue is your other magazine you need to study. And don't forget, you can also leave a comment below if there's any videos that you would like and I don't already have.